Welcome back to another episode of the Element Q podcast, where we dive in and discuss all things related to the deeper healing or a deeper healing within LGBTQ plus communities. And my guest today is Jamie Remmers. She is a doctor of education. We're going to hear more about that. Welcome to the Element Q podcast. I'm your host, TJ Woodward, and I'm thrilled to have you join us for this empowering journey. Each week, we shine a light on the authors, thought leaders, therapists, coaches, and healers of all types who are making a difference in the LGBTQ plus community. Together, we honor those who came before us, the courageous and resilient trailblazers who stood for our rights and recognition. Their strength laid the foundation we stand on today. Here, we celebrate their legacy by diving into the stories, insights, and tools that inspire gentleness, healing, and transformation. So get ready to be uplifted and empowered. This is the Element Q podcast. Jamie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, I'm so grateful for your yes. And, when we were talking about like what was showing up for you, the thing that came through is visibility. And I love that conversation. So let's go ahead and just dive in. What does that mean to you? And how does that relate? Because I understand the importance of visibility, but how does that actually help in the healing? Because I think it's interesting to discuss that.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, I think it's interesting when you think about just the levels of visibility with queerness and LGBTQ plus folks. Even just 15 years ago, right? It was maybe 3 to 5% of the population was identifying. And I got to give a lot of credit to Gen Z on this one, but we are pushing those numbers into the double digits. And now what I see as visibility is just this way of showing up and saying that we are here and really just normalizing it, right? It's not this token identity anymore, but rather 10% of the population is a pretty large number. And I see that as I want to do more asset-based talking about our queerness and our identity, not so much deficit-based, right? So I see it as healing because this way of just saying, yeah, that's awesome. I read a stat the other day that said, this law school, I won't name the school because it's not my school. This law school says that 28% of the students are LGBTQ plus.
Wow.
How cool is that? Not just for an LGBTQ perspective student or current student, but the faculty, the staff, the community are now saying, "Oh wow, like that's a large number. That's awesome." So I love the idea of the visibility equal healing. I love the idea of just really normalizing it, asset-based stories too, and really showing queerness in this beautiful way, not just a negative landscape of kind of the deficits that we have to face. Obviously, we face struggles, but I really love the idea of visibility showing up as its own form of resistance.
Well, and I love this too, because I think about it, I resonate with it very deeply because I've often said, the fight has a place, but really the visibility, the courage to be ourselves and, the coming out process, if you will, or even just normalizing it. I remember thinking, because I'm obviously an older generation than you. So like I this may be untrue, but I feel like we're the first generation that actually was visible, right? So,
Yeah, yeah,
because the generation before me was still very much hiding, and there was
yep,
obviously maybe people 10 years older than I am that were starting to like come out and be more visible. So they ushered in greater ease for me, which I think is more like what Gen Z now, they're coming in with a little bit more ease and still standing in that truth. But I think
yeah.
being visible is such an important part of the healing because that's what starts to change hearts and minds, right? I remember also thinking we
Oh,
will have
100%.
arrived when, for example, like you're watching a game show with couples and like there's just a same-sex couple, but it's not mentioned that they are, it's just normalized. And we are obviously
Right,
past that
right.
threshold. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I love when I see a show now or a movie where it's like that person isn't tokenized, like they're just part of the plot,
Right.
and yeah. And there's a small anecdote I could share about kind of the way visibility can change somebody too. It's so my profession, I work in higher education. I never thought I would. I actually hated college when I was an undergrad
Mm,
because I couldn't be visible. I
mm.
was in the closet for 11 years. And get this, I played women's soccer for 4 years and not a single queer person.
Well,
Well, we
unlikely.
could Yeah, if we could fast forward, half of them are gay now.
Right, right.
Um, but when I was in undergrad, I really struggled with my mental health.
Mm,
I didn't have a single out person. This was 2005 to 2009. No rainbow flags, no LGBTQ center, no out faculty, no out staff. So what did I do? I retreated, and I was very detached from my academics. I barely graduated. I'm surprised I did. And then I kind of said, school out of sight, out of mind. I went into kind of intercultural experiences. I love studying abroad. That was like my only thing that grounded me.
mm,
So I ended up moving back to Australia on a working visa. And during that year, meeting different types of people, meeting queer people, finally started coming to my identity. And by the time I got back to the United States, I was bartending and waitressing for a bit, really honing in on who I was and what my passions were. And I loved international education so much, but I needed a master's to do it. And I was dragging my feet on it. I was like, undergrad was horrible, but all right, let me try. I applied to New York University, NYU, and I got in for my master's in international ed. And at orientation that first day, they talked about an LGBTQ plus center. They had out queer alumni. They had out queer staff and faculty, and they celebrated my identity. And it
mm.
was the first time in my formal education experience that somebody said, I'm safe there and I'm celebrated there. I ended up becoming class president, student ambassador, killing it in all my classes, realizing that I can be smart if somebody gave me the privilege and the opportunity to just be myself, to just be able to not think about my queerness. If that's just on autopilot, I could learn. I could focus on my studies. But if I'm so fixated on, can I be visible here? Can I be safe here? I'm not going to learn. And that is why I ended up taking up higher ed as my career. So now I got my doctorate in higher education. My dissertation is on LGBTQ data, which we can get into. But I work in it now. I work at University of Southern California, and I want to be a beacon for my students to show you can be visible here. Visibility is power, and visibility also makes people be able to reach their fullest potential. I'm a walking example of it. So that's just kind of an anecdote of why it means so much to me.
Wow. As you're talking, I'm thinking about the impact on the collective and the individual. And, when I first heard you talk about visibility, I was thinking about the collective, like how important it is, as a people, if you will, to like have the visibility. But when you're talking about your own personal struggle at school, because at least in part, hiding the identity. I flash back to high school in Indiana in the early 1980s, right? And that was maybe perhaps a little more so even than 2005, right? So we're talking 20 years earlier.
Yeah.
And there was a sense of it's not okay to be me, which was already like, it was a collective shame that already hooked into my individual shame. And that shame kept me hiding and kept me small. And I too struggled in school. I struggled in school so much I didn't go to college until I was 40 because when you're talking, I was thinking, wow, I obviously talk a lot about what it was like to grow up as a little gay boy in Indiana in the 60s and 70s and remembering the experience of feeling broken as part of why I struggled in my early life and had addiction. And, I got sober young, but even in my early recovery was still feeling very broken and damaged. But when you were talking about it in that specific way as it relates to school, I was actually kind of going back to like the traumatic experience,
Yeah.
and so deeply in the closet that there were four of us, obviously all gay, very good friends. We weren't even out to each other. I mean,
Hmm.
two of them weren't even out to themselves, but at least two of us were definitely out
Right.
to ourselves.
If
But
only there was a secret like code handshake you can do and see if the other one does it.
what's funny when I say it's funny now, but like we had our lockers together and someone spray painted Frisco Row and like the F word with an arrow. And I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, well, obviously, right? I mean, one of the ways that I worked with the trauma of that experience was to be like really, kind of like very rebellious or like in your face.
Mhm.
But that didn't do the deeper healing because that was actually masking the wound.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And yeah, sometimes it's the hardest to be visible to those closest to us as well. And that was scary, right? Like you're around these people, growing up with these people, and all of a sudden you have to say this big thing that you've been hiding for
Yeah.
years. And it felt, I mean, just reliving the coming out experience. And Now I have some of my students in my classes, some of my Gen Z students, we talk about coming out and they're just kind of like, yeah,
What's
so,
that?
and in a way, I'm just like, oh gosh, I wish, but it brings me so much joy to see
Yeah,
that obviously it's not for everybody. There's still so
right.
much out there that work that has to be done, but just to see the normalization of it, to see it showing up in data, I think it doesn't sound that sexy at first, but when you think about it, to see things like there's this first year student survey in colleges out of UCLA at the Williams Institute, and they'll do kind of intake of demographics, and I get so nerded out when I see like at NYU when I was doing my studies the incoming cohort, that like 23% of the students of that first year did not identify as straight. That's how it was
Mm,
categorized, do not identify. And that was domestic students. International was 11% of students did
yeah,
not identify as straight. And how cool is that to go from, 15, 20 years ago when I was in college, zero people,
yeah.
to now people are putting it on data, they're showing up in these spaces, they're showing up in class, they're contributing their stories, changing hearts and minds. And that's why I think visibility is that kind of buzzword for me when I think about this collective and individual healing.
Yeah, it's interesting because I often say, well, I didn't really need to come out because it was so obvious, which is true, right? On one
Closet with
hand,
glass.
but on the other hand, it was like I still had shame about it. And I remember, just trying to pretend to be someone who I wasn't. And, I had in my own journey, I often minimize that. But that's so significant, like to like pretend to be someone we're not. I think
Yeah.
there's a light side to that. There's no doubt or no surprise that we're also creative, right? Like because
Yep.
there's this sense of like taking on all these different identities and trying to figure out who and what we are, but really hiding our true essence or our true selves. And I think it's easy to minimize that, but it is so significant. And then on the flip side, it's so significant when we're able to be ourselves and to be truly authentic, which is a really beautiful thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't take it for granted. Still, I still will show up in spaces and just say, "Gosh, and I present very queer. I'm a short hair, queer person. Sometimes I still get the looks if I'm traveling out of a liberal city or a bubble. Yeah, I get the looks, but you know what? I've learned to kind of say, yes, I'm here. I'm not going to minimize or make myself small to make you feel comfortable. I'm going to be visible, and you know what? I'm going to be kind too, because I love trying to reach across the aisle and show people that we are good people, that we care, that we are contributing to society, that we are family members, we are friends, we are professionals. We are not this evil thing that, right-wing media makes us out to be. We are real people. And that is also where I think visibility is such a power tool to show all of us, all the complexities of who we are. And that's why I use authenticity in telling my story in spaces that might be a little bit more center or right. And I see hearts and minds change. And I'm so grateful I'm in a field that I get to do that. I know that's not often, but I'm just trying to make my mark where I can.
Yeah, and you know what? I will even lean in and say the reverse is also true. And, in some circles it's controversial to say that. So I'm just going to be bold because I think, if you look at the far left media, they want everyone on the right to be also like evil and not good people. And I
Right, right.
remember a firsthand example of this. So I created a modality called conscious recovery. And I was told that there was this particular person who was very Christian. This is what the person said. She's very Christian. So I don't think she likes conscious recovery, and I'm guessing it's because you're gay, right? This was all before I met her. She's one of my closest friends now, and like it was absurd when I met her to realize that someone had like put that stereotype on her. I don't even know
Yeah.
where she's at politically. It doesn't really matter to me, but just this idea that this idea because she's Christian, she's going to be homophobic, right? And it just is so not true across the board. So I want to invite both all of us to look at like, am I believing, the stereotypes or the way the media talks about the polarization and to live in a world where we're being fed through social media and unfortunately mainstream media now, which is no
Yeah.
longer even attempting to be unbiased, right?
Yep.
let me question those narratives, right? And there are people who, judge me. Like we recently went on a family cruise, and there was a distant family person who decided not to come because my husband and I were going to be on the cruise. And I'm just like, that still exists, right? And it
Uh,
was counter to his
yeah.
religion, but that's not most
Yeah.
people, right? Most
Right.
people,
Right.
and I love it because my dad and his wife, they say we live in LA too, Lower Alabama. And like, to be around people that are from the stereotype that they have of LA, Los Angeles, and the stereotype we would have about Alabama, let's
Yeah.
break down some of those and create bridges. And it is possible.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's, we can't lose that. That would be we'd be losing so much of our humanity. And I love trying to change hearts and minds in the most, gentle and easy way possible. And I think a lot of it is through storytelling and through lived experience. And, I'm not trying to put any sort of like shame on anybody that like doesn't know, because sometimes too you just meet people that just don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, one funny story when I was in my master's, that that time of my life that I really started to reach my potential. I had a friend from South Korea that it was her first time in the United States. She
Yeah.
did her undergrad in South Korea, so she and I got lunch together the first week, and I made a joke. The waiter that we had was clearly very queer,
Yeah.
and I go, "Oh, he's cute." And then she goes, "Oh, do you like him?" And I was like, "Oh, no, no, no. Cute meaning kind of like, oh, like, he's gay, he's cute, and I'm gay." And I got so nervous because I this was still so new to me to be in an educational space and to be so bold with my identity and with somebody from a different country that I didn't
Yeah.
know how she was raised. And she was so sweet. She said, "Oh, you're gay. Okay." And then I could see her wheels turning, and she literally looks at me and goes, "I know somebody who's gay. Her name is Kim. She lives in Boston. Do you know her?" I got such a genuine chuckle out of that. And instead of being, I looked at that as an invitation to say, like, let me tell you a little bit more about this identity. And like, that's so nice you thought, to connect me. Maybe eventually I'll meet your friend Kim if she ever comes down to visit. And then a year and a half later, me and this girl are friends, and I take her to Stonewall, and we have a night out, and she's just like, "I'm so glad I met you. Like, I love gay people." And it's just the smallest little moments. I could have decided to say, "Oh, how narrow-minded of her," or how she doesn't know anything, and walk away from that. But instead, lean in and invite people in, and use your story to teach them in a way that shows like just that you believe they can learn too, not in a condescending way, but in a really, loving, caring, let me invite you in. And it's still one of my favorite stories that I tell to this day about just trying to teach people.
Yeah, I think there's two stories that come to mind, but one of them I don't think I've ever actually said in any kind of public forum. My book, Conscious Recovery, was transcribed into Farsi. Of all languages, that's the first language that other than English. And it came from this
Wow.
therapist, and she lives in Iran. And she said, this is so beautiful. And I think the people of Iran, and it works so beautifully with our faith. And I was like, that's so interesting to me, which was great for me because I got to see the stereotypes I might have, right? But it came to a very funny point when she was translating the book. She said, "I'm confused about something. You dedicate, who is Will Woodward? You're dedicating your husband. Is that your co-author, Adriana? Is that her husband?" I'm like, "No, that's my husband." And she, 2 days passed. We're on via email across the world, right?
Yep, yep.
And she said, "Clarify for me again. I don't understand." And I said, "That's my husband, Will Woodward, and I'm TJ Woodward." She said, "Oh, okay." And I thought that's just a moment
Hmm.
that's so beautiful because how easy would it be for me to like not include that? And I tell my
Yeah.
story in the beginning of conscious, all of my books, but in Conscious Recovery. And I will share with you, I had this idea when I was telling my story, not even about the person from Iran, but in general, like, oh, I wonder if it's going to do a disservice to someone who's reading Conscious Recovery. And then I caught myself and I'm like, no, this is about that visibility. And of course,
Exactly.
standing in that, I've never had any kind of pushback. She wasn't even pushing back. She was just needed clarity, right? It just
Yeah.
was out of her consciousness to understand
Yep.
what I was saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, visibility in we think it's something just very nonchalant, like, oh, yes, of course. And you don't know who it can impact and affect. And, I think that's why I love looking queer, talking queer. And, I've got it on my email signatures. And it's not this kind of like, oh, in your face thing that sometimes, again, some media can do.
Yeah.
But again, it's just normalizing it. It really is
Yeah.
just treating it as it's a piece of me and it's an important piece of me and it's an asset. It's not, something that I need to bring up because I'm struggling or I need help. I mean, hell yeah, we all struggle and need help, but I love owning this identity as a power.
Yes. So I'd love to switch gears a little bit and hear a little bit more about the work that you do and how this identity shows up in your work and, to continue on the theme of like visibility there and what you've seen.
Yeah, so I have the privilege of working at USC. Currently, I'm at the Rossier School of Education, but in a week's time, I'm starting a new role in the College of Letters, Arts, and Sciences, USC Dornsife. And I also teach. I adjunct teach in various classes involving identity, equity, leadership, org theory, and things like that. I think one of the best pieces of my role is at orientation, I get to introduce our team and I get to introduce myself and kind of just set the tone for the program that the students are going to be joining. And I work with all master's students. Um, and I usually tell a little snippet about, who I am and how I got here. And I center my queerness as well. I'll say that my name is Jamie Remmers. I use she and they pronouns. I identify as queer. I mean, the word lesbian is still okay with me because I think that I'd rather bring that in for people that are still unsure. I think, that are learning
Yeah.
when they're like, well, if you're queer, are you still lesbian? If you use they pronouns, I'm like, what, just call me whatever, but just know that I'm queer. And in my 4 years in this role, I would need two hands to count on the number of students that have come up to me or emailed me and said, seeing me, a very out queer person, made them feel like they can be themselves here. And I've even had two students come out to me as the first person in their lives.
Oh, wow.
And what a privilege, what an immense honor. And I mean, sometimes I get choked up about it because it's such a human, beautiful experience to be that for that person, to be the beacon that they see, then for them to feel safe enough to come talk to me.
Mm,
Um, I wish more, colleges, maybe high school, colleges, universities, and maybe even some companies, just the identity itself without having it to be, some sort of like, oh yeah, there's like a club for that, or
right.
there's a committee for that, there's a task force for that.
Yeah, yeah.
No, just to really center it as I'm a leader, I'm the director of this department, and they see me and they come out. And, it's been really nice too, having some faculty say, look, I have a module or two in my syllabus that I think would be better fit with somebody with your experience. Would you want to do a guest lecture? I want to learn. I'm not just passing it off to you and leaving. I want to learn from your experience. If I'm teaching about queer students and I'm a, heterosexual cis person, so I've had a lot of staff and faculty lean on me for that too. And none of it has ever felt burnout or like, you're that token person. It's definitely felt like I want to be part of the conversation. I want to learn.
Yeah.
Um, and I think too, also being a first generation student, my parents didn't go to school. So I think a lot of students really see, wait, I can be all these identities and be a director, be a doctor. I mean, I got my damn doctorate. Who would have thought? That college kid never would have thought that. So just being that beacon for these students and having them share that with me. And they hold so many identities, my students. They have so much on their shoulders. So many of them are working part-time jobs and come into school. And sometimes their identity is the last thing they want to have to think about. So I've had so many say, they could, like I said, take away the hyper fixating on the queerness and just be. So you can do the work that you're here to do while still being yourself. And that is the one of the best joys of my job.
Well, and I love what you're sharing too about being available and open to having the conversations because I think conversations heal. And, that might be overly simplistic, but I think it's part of the healing. And when we move into a place, like I think about having conversations about race where I might be afraid to say something wrong. I always appreciate where I have the friend I can ask the question with so that
Yes,
I
yes.
can be educated and informed, right? And I think in some ways, at least part of our culture, I find people are afraid to ask about gender or gender identity or what are pronouns and why are they important? Not from a place, but it could be met with resistance, like you should know, right? And so
Yeah,
maybe
yeah,
they're afraid. And I love what you're saying because it's really healing to be a safe enough place. I always say to someone, just you can ask me anything. I don't care how absurd you think the question is, or if you think you're
yep,
going to say it wrong. It's fine with me. I will tell you my point of view. I don't have the answer, but I will share my experience with you. And even just that in itself is so healing.
absolutely. And I do that in class as well. And to be honest, the she they is new for me.
Yeah.
And I really thank my younger students. I really thank Gen
Mhm.
Z for giving me that language. And I was having so much imposter syndrome about my gender
Yeah.
that I never quite felt she, her, but I never felt like I could exist in a world that, if uh, I, I feel this. And I think the best analogy I saw is comedian Mae Martin says, think about Beauty and the Beast. On one side, you've got Belle. On the other side, you have Gaston. But in the middle, you have that candlestick. Just wants to
Yes.
have fun, right? So I really, for a while, I would tell my friends, I kind of identify like that candlestick in the Mae Martin joke. And
I
then
love it.
finally, yeah, it's so funny. I still have some of my faculty here. They know the joke, and they're like, "Yeah, that's the candlestick." Um, but they really helped me wrap my head around the fact that I can use she and they,
Yeah.
and that is I'm valid to do that, and I'm allowed to. And at 38 years old, right, I felt like I was coming out again when I was telling friends and family, "Look, I'm starting a low dose of testosterone. I'm using she they pronouns, and I don't know what." And everybody's like, "Well, what's the end game?" I'm like, "I'm in it. This is it.
Yeah.
I want to be in this gray area, and I love it, and I'm thriving in it." So but I always open up to say, ask me questions. And I use that story too to tell students it's never too late to figure stuff out, right? I was in my late 30s, and your generation gave me so much more language and confidence that I could go do this. And I started T this year. I started T in February. So I'll be hitting my 1 year pretty soon.
Wow, amazing. Well, believe it or not, we're toward the end of our conversation. It goes so quickly.
So that flew
I'm
by.
wondering, I'll give you a moment to kind of sit with this, but is there anything else that's kind of showing up for you that maybe you want to, kind of say in closing, or maybe there's another topic that seems relevant to you in this conversation? Is there anything present
I
for
think
you?
the one thing I might not have talked about enough or at all is just allyship. And
Mm,
to the folks out there that, don't identify as LGBTQ plus, just continuing to show up. Just because you see good things in the news, I don't know if that's the right time right now, but if you see good things in the news, right,
yeah,
it doesn't mean the fight is over. And I've definitely had a few of those conversations where it's like they just see some of the really good things because maybe the way they're tuned into the media or the news, they're just seeing, oh, wow, that was past, that was past. Okay, my queer friends are probably fine. We who might be a little bit more tapped in because it's our identity, we see everything. We see, the things from local to, national to global. And I think it's just, again, that's that part of reaching across the aisle. It's a part of changing hearts and minds. I don't want the allyship just to be once a year, you put on rainbow and we're going to go party together. I want it to be the day to day. I want to do the same for, identities that I don't hold. I want to show up at the table because I know that my buddies are going to get tired and once in a while they need somebody to tap in. So I think my other thing too is just, allies, keep it up the other 364 of the year, other than, the fun day that we're going to put on the rainbow glitter. And thank you for being allies. I cannot say it enough. We need you, and I commend my queer community too, just for just being visible. That's that. Like I said, it's power, it's healing. Just being us can change hearts and minds. So thank you for being visible and continue to. And allies get our backs.
I love that because I was also hearkening back for some reason we're talking about education, so I'm thinking about my high school experience, but that
Hmm.
one teacher who saw me, Ms. Pearson, I love her. We became friends as adults, and she's quite incredible, and she was just that one person who saw me. And yes, it was about being an ally, but it was also even beyond that. It was just like, I see you and accept you for who or whatever you are. Like, I wasn't even
Yeah.
out then, so it wasn't like she was like, I'm an ally for you as a gay, I guess, boy then, because I wasn't even 18. But It was more just like, I see you and it's okay to be you regardless. And like that level of safety just changed my life because there was,
Right.
I remember the extremely homophobic fifth grade teacher that literally would like unbutton my shirt, like boys don't wear their button that way, or like, all of that. So on the flip
Yeah.
side, it is so important that we see one another and that we're curious with one another and that we're willing to have these conversations. Because as you said, that visibility really does create healing.
Yeah.
So,
And look at you're just bringing those back from way back when and how prominent, right? So
yes.
hopefully we have more of the teachers that gave you that really great experience and we become that for other people.
Amazing. Well, thank you for this conversation. We'll of course have all of your bio in the show notes, but I just want to say thank you, Jamie, Dr. Jamie. I'll say Dr. Jamie for being on
Thank
the
you.
show and sharing your experience, sharing your love, and I've loved this conversation. So thank you.
Thank you
And
so much, TJ.
yeah, and everyone who's watching or listening, you know what to do. Share it. If there's someone in your life who you think this episode will resonate with, please send it, like and subscribe. And thank you, everyone. Until the next time, thank you for tuning into the Element Q podcast. Peace and blessings, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Element Q podcast. It's an honor to walk this path of healing and transformation with you. Remember, the courage and resilience of those who came before us live on in each of us. Let's continue to carry their legacy forward as we support one another in creating a world filled with love, gentleness, and empowerment. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast with someone who needs to hear it. Together, we're building a brighter future, one story at a time. Until next time, I'm TJ Woodward, and this has been the Element Q podcast.